Subscribe to see more stories. Enjoy your viewing.
I never imagined that the life I'd built with Sophia would unravel so disastrously. My name is Michael, and I always believed that love was a sanctuary, a shelter from the storms of life. Yet, the very foundation of my existence, my marriage, had become a stage for betrayal and heartbreak. It all began with subtle changes in her behavior. Sophia had always been a vibrant, affectionate woman who filled our home with laughter and gentle whispers of hope. However, over the past year, a cold distance had crept between us. The light in her eyes dimmed, and our once shared dreams gradually faded into silence. I noticed her spending more time away from home, lost in her own thoughts, and sometimes even returning with a mysterious spark in her gaze that I had never seen before. I brushed these observations off as stress from her work or the weight of personal insecurities, never daring to confront the possibility of infidelity. Late one rainy evening, after months of unspoken tension, I stumbled upon undeniable evidence. I found a series of texts on her phone, passionate, tender messages exchanged with someone named Daniel. Each word was a dagger to my heart, and I felt as though my entire world was disintegrating in an instant. My hands trembled as I read the intimate confessions, each sentence a stark contrast to the loving words I once believed defined our relationship. The discovery left me numb, yet ignited a burning need for the truth. I confronted Sophia the very next morning. The confrontation was not the dramatic explosion of emotions that one might expect from a story of betrayal. Instead, it was a quiet, desperate plea for honesty, a man clinging to the remnants of his shattered trust. Sophia's eyes, usually so full of warmth, were now clouded with guilt and regret. She admitted to the affair, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to justify the moments of weakness that had cost us everything. She spoke of loneliness and the lure of attention, but her words were hollow echoes that could not mend the deep scars etched into my soul. As the days passed, I found myself wandering through memories of our happier times, trying to piece together where everything had gone wrong. I recalled the day we met at a small coffee shop in downtown, a day when the world seemed to stop for us. Her laughter had been like music, and her smile, a beacon of hope. We had shared dreams of a future filled with promise, a future that now lay in ruins. The betrayal wasn't just a personal attack, it felt like a cruel twist of fate that had stolen the very essence of our shared life. In the midst of this internal storm, I sought solace in solitude. I spent long hours in the quiet of our now lonely apartment, the silence punctuated only by the ticking of an old clock, a constant reminder of time slipping away. I wrestled with conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, and a profound sense of loss. I was no longer the man who once confidently believed in the power of love and commitment. Instead, I was a man betrayed, forced to confront the bitter reality that sometimes love can turn into a weapon that wounds beyond repair. The betrayal left me questioning everything. How had I been so blind to the signs? Could I have saved us from this inevitable collapse? I ruminated on our past conversations, searching for hints that I had dismissed as mere quirks of personality. Now, every moment with Sophia was tainted by the thought of her duplicity. The memories that once brought comfort now seemed to mock me with the promise of what once was, and what could have been. The realization was a cruel twist of fate, a reminder that even the most beautiful stories can have tragic endings. In the solitude of my despair, I began writing in a journal, hoping to make sense of the chaos within me. Every word I scribbled on the page was an attempt to reclaim some semblance of control over my life. I wrote about the initial shock, the gradual crumbling of our trust, and the unbearable weight of loneliness that settled over me like a shroud. It was a cathartic process, each sentence a small step towards understanding my shattered reality. Yet, the more I wrote, the more I realized that the pages could never fully capture the depth of my loss. I decided to confront my emotions head-on by seeking help. I reached out to a close friend, Jonathan, someone who had always been a pillar of support in my life. Jonathan listened with compassion, offering words of comfort and a promise to stand by me through this tumultuous period. His presence was a gentle reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were people who cared. However, no advice or solace could fill the void left by Sophia's betrayal. The pain was uniquely personal, an ache that echoed through every fiber of my being. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I felt both the sting of betrayal and the slow, painful process of self-discovery. I began to see that while Sophia's infidelity had shattered the foundation of our marriage, it had also forced me to confront parts of myself that I had long ignored. The man who had once defined himself solely by his capacity to love was now forced to reckon with his own vulnerabilities and imperfections. It was a journey filled with painful self-realization, one that required me to rebuild my identity from the fragments of a broken heart. Now, standing on the precipice of a future that I never imagined, I realized that the road ahead will be long and uncertain. The betrayal has changed me irrevocably, but it has also awakened a strength I never knew existed. I am determined to rise from the ashes of our ruined dreams, even though the cost has been nothing short of soul-crushing. Sophia's betrayal was a harsh lesson in the fragility of trust, a lesson that will forever haunt the corridors of my mind. I can only hope that in the midst of my pain, I find the courage to forgive, not for her sake, but for my own. Forgiveness might be the only way to reclaim the parts of me that have been lost in this tumultuous storm. Yet, as I pen these words, I am painfully aware that the path to healing is fraught with the remnants of a love that once promised forever. The echoes of betrayal will linger long after the wounds have healed, a constant reminder that some scars never fully fade. And so, here I stand, at the beginning of an uncertain journey. The story of my shattered illusions has only just begun, and though the road ahead is dark, I carry a faint glimmer of hope. For in the midst of chaos, there lies the possibility of rebirth, a chance to rebuild not just what was lost, but to create something new from the ashes of despair. In the weeks following the revelation of Sophia's betrayal, I found myself trapped in a relentless cycle of disbelief and introspection. Each morning, I awoke with a heavy heart and a mind riddled with questions. The remnants of my shattered trust lay scattered around me, and I was left to piece together the fragments of a life that once felt so complete. I felt as if I was walking through a hall of mirrors, each reflection distorting the image of the man I once was. The days blurred together as I oscillated between numbness and a desperate need for answers. I began revisiting the memories of our early days with Sophia, their brightness now overshadowed by the dark clouds of deceit. I kept wondering, when did the loving gestures, the soft-spoken promises, and the whispered dreams all begin to crumble? The image of Sophia, with her warm smile and kind eyes, had been irrevocably tarnished by the betrayal. The truth about Daniel, the man who had slipped into our lives unnoticed, became an enigma that I was determined to solve. One cold, gray afternoon, I found myself at the edge of the city's park, a place where we had once spent countless hours together, sharing stories and dreaming about the future. The vibrant memories of laughter and intimacy seemed surreal against the backdrop of the overcast sky. As I walked aimlessly, I recalled our final confrontation, the trembling confession, the muted apologies, and the silent acceptance that nothing could restore what had been broken. Each step I took felt like a journey deeper into the labyrinth of my own emotions. I reached out to Jonathan again, desperate for clarity and some semblance of normalcy. His words had once offered me solace, but now they echoed back with a mix of empathy and helplessness. "Michael, you need to understand that sometimes the person you love most isn't capable of giving you the honesty you deserve," he said softly over a cup of bitter coffee in a quiet cafe. His advice, though meant to comfort, only deepened the chasm within me. I couldn't help but feel that there was more to the story than Sophia had admitted. My mind kept wandering to the unanswered questions. What did Daniel mean to her? Was he merely a fleeting escape, or had he been a steady presence long before I had noticed? Haunted by these uncertainties, I began to scrutinize every detail of my shared life with Sophia. I sifted through old photographs, letters, and even mundane everyday objects in our apartment, searching for clues that might explain the slow decay of our marriage. Each relic of our past seemed to whisper secrets of happier times, mocking me with the promise of what we once had. Yet, in the recesses of my mind, I could hear the faint sound of a ticking clock, a reminder that time was relentlessly moving forward, dragging me along even as I struggled to make sense of the chaos. Determined to reclaim some control over my life, I threw myself into work. I sought refuge in the routine of long hours and late nights, burying myself in the details of my job in hopes that a distraction would dull the sting of betrayal. The more I worked, however, the more I realized that escaping my pain was futile. The echoes of my past haunted every boardroom meeting and every lonely night spent in the glow of my computer screen. I began to document my thoughts, writing down every emotion, every anger-filled word, every tear shed in solitude. The journal became my confidant, a silent witness to the internal war that raged within me. In the midst of this personal turmoil, I decided to confront Sophia one more time. I needed to understand the full extent of her deception, not to mend our relationship, for that ship had long sailed, but to bring closure to the chaos consuming my heart. I arranged to meet her at a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city, a place where anonymity and introspection went hand in hand. The restaurant's dim lighting and hushed ambience seemed to mirror the gravity of our conversation. When Sophia arrived, she looked hesitant, as if weighed down by the enormity of our shared history. I could see the flicker of regret in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of the mistakes that had led us here. We sat in a small booth, the world around us fading into insignificance as we faced each other. "Sophia," I began, my voice steady despite the storm within me, "I need to know, was there ever a point when you truly loved me? Or was I simply a placeholder until something else, someone else, came along?" Her eyes darted away, and for a moment, I saw the ghost of the woman I once adored. "Michael, I don't know," she stammered, her voice laced with sorrow. "I loved you in my own way, but somewhere along the line, I lost myself. Daniel was there when I felt invisible, and I made a mistake that I can't undo." Her words were heavy with regret, but they offered no solace, only further confirmation of the betrayal that had unraveled our lives. I pressed on, searching for more answers. "Did you ever think about us? About the promises we made?" The question hung in the air like a fragile thread, easily severed by the weight of her confession. Sophia's silence was answer enough, a quiet admission that the foundation of our love had crumbled long before my discovery of the affair. The conversation left me with a bitter taste, an acknowledgement that some wounds are too deep to ever truly heal. As the meeting ended, I felt a mix of relief and overwhelming sadness. I was no longer chasing a phantom of what could have been, instead, I was confronting the harsh reality that our paths had irrevocably diverged. The drive home was a blur of city lights and introspection. I realized that the quest for understanding had not granted me the clarity I sought but had only deepened the void inside me. The threads of my past were frayed beyond repair, each tug revealing another painful memory. In the aftermath of that fateful meeting, I began to accept that the love we once shared was now a relic of a bygone era, a bittersweet reminder of what once was, but could never be again. The realization brought with it a profound sense of isolation, yet it also marked the beginning of my journey toward self-reclamation. I resolved to learn from the pain, to rebuild myself piece by piece, even if it meant letting go of a future that was never truly mine to claim. My nights became a battleground for introspection. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, as my mind raced with thoughts of betrayal and loss. It was during these long, sleepless hours that I began to understand the complexities of forgiveness and the struggle to move on. Forgiving Sophia wasn't about absolving her of her actions, it was about freeing myself from the shackles of anger and despair. It was about acknowledging that the wounds of betrayal could, in time, transform into scars that reminded me of my resilience. Yet, even as I embarked on this painful journey of self-discovery, the specter of Sophia's infidelity loomed large in my mind. Every whispered rumor, every shared secret, and every unspoken word felt like another piece of the puzzle that would never fit together. The road ahead was murky, filled with the shadows of a past that refused to let go. But I clung to the belief that, eventually, the darkness would recede, revealing a path forward, a future where I could finally emerge from the ruins of our failed love. The months passed slowly, each day a testament to my resolve to overcome the betrayal. I immersed myself in new experiences, seeking to redefine my identity outside the confines of a love that had once defined me. I traveled, met new people, and slowly began to see that the pain, while all-consuming, did not have to dictate the course of my life. It was a painful lesson, a harsh reminder that even the strongest bonds can be broken by the quiet erosion of trust. But as I began to piece together a semblance of normalcy, I couldn't shake the haunting knowledge that the life we once dreamed of together was irretrievably lost. Our shared future had been replaced by a stark, unyielding reality, a reality where the only certainty was the lingering pain of betrayal. Sophia's choices had set us on a collision course that neither of us could avoid, and as much as I tried to reclaim a sense of purpose, the scars of our fractured past remained. Standing at the crossroads of memory and hope, I knew that the journey ahead would be one of constant struggle and, ultimately, transformation. The woman I once loved was now a stranger, and the love that had once promised a lifetime of joy had instead delivered a lifetime of lessons in the fragility of trust. The unraveling thread of our shared existence had led us to this bitter juncture, and I was left to navigate the aftermath of a love that had burned too brightly only to collapse into ashes. In the weeks that followed our painful meeting, the atmosphere between Sophia and me grew heavier with an unspoken tension. Each day felt like a prelude to an inevitable collision, a collision that promised neither reconciliation nor comfort, only the stark realization that we were both hurt and irreparably altered. I found myself teetering on the edge of a decision that would forever change the course of my life, as every moment of quiet introspection was haunted by memories and lingering questions that refused to fade. I began to notice the subtleties that had become part of our daily existence. The way Sophia would glance in my direction with a flicker of guilt before quickly averting her eyes, or the way our conversations had become stilted exchanges filled with half-truths and longing for escape. It was as if we were both prisoners, bound by the shared history of our love and the betrayal that had shattered its foundation. In the silence of our once shared home, the echoes of laughter and warmth had long been replaced by the bitter murmurs of regret. I tried to immerse myself in work and personal projects, hoping to distract my mind from the relentless surge of memories and what-ifs. But no matter how many deadlines I met or how many new routines I established, the thoughts of Sophia and the ghost of our lost future lingered persistently. Each evening, as I returned to a house that now felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I would catch myself wondering if there was any chance for redemption or if the road we had been traveling was destined to lead to mutual destruction. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, I decided to walk through the city in search of solace. The neon lights, which once held the promise of a vibrant nightlife and hope, now seemed to mock me with their dazzling but empty brilliance. I found myself drifting aimlessly until I reached a familiar bridge overlooking the river, a spot where I had once found comfort during moments of doubt. The gentle murmur of the water below was a reminder of how life flows continuously, indifferent to the turmoil of the individual. In that moment of solitude, I resolved that the time had come to face the unyielding truth of our relationship. That night, I sent a message to Sophia, proposing one final meeting, a conversation that would serve as the turning point in our shared journey. There was no longing for reconciliation in my words, only the necessity to confront the fractured remnants of our past and carve out a clear path forward. To my surprise, she agreed, and we arranged to meet at a quiet, dimly lit bistro on the outskirts of the city. The venue, with its hushed ambience and an almost melancholic charm, seemed a fitting stage for what would be our final dialogue. As I waited for her arrival, my mind replayed every conversation we had ever shared, the laughter, the dreams, the promises of forever. I had once believed that each memory was a testament to the strength of our bond, but now they served as painful reminders of what had been lost. I tried to steel myself for the confrontation, knowing that the truth would cut deep, perhaps deeper than anything I had experienced before. When Sophia arrived, she carried herself with a quiet resignation, her eyes downcast and her expression guarded. The air between us was thick with unspoken sorrow and the bitter taste of regret. We exchanged a few awkward pleasantries before settling into a secluded corner of the bistro. The conversation began with tentative questions and vague explanations, but it quickly escalated into a raw and unfiltered exchange of emotions. "I've been thinking a lot about us," I said softly, my voice laden with both sorrow and resolve. "I keep trying to remember the woman I once knew, but all I see now are the echoes of choices made and promises broken." My words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shared history. Sophia's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, filled with remorse and the pain of her own internal battles. "I'm sorry, Michael," she whispered. "I never meant for things to become this way. I was lost in my own confusion and desire for something different. I never wanted to hurt you." Her voice wavered, betraying the internal conflict that had driven her to betray the one person who had given her everything. But as much as she tried to justify her actions, the damage had been done. The dialogue became a dissection of our once-cherished memories, each word exposing the raw underbelly of a love that had decayed from within. I questioned every moment of vulnerability and every shared secret, trying desperately to understand how our love had transformed into a battlefield of regrets. The conversation shifted from tentative regret to unspoken anger. I began to recount the moments when I had felt abandoned, when her eyes no longer held the warmth of affection but instead a cold detachment that left me feeling isolated. "Do you remember when we used to talk about our dreams? Now all I hear are excuses, Sophia. Every time I look at you, I see someone who has betrayed the trust that once defined our bond." My voice was firm, yet beneath the anger lay a profound sadness that no words could capture. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she tried to explain the emptiness that had crept into her heart, the silent void that had driven her into the arms of another. "I tried to fill that void, Michael, but it was never enough," she admitted, her tone trembling with vulnerability. "I felt trapped, suffocated by the expectations of our life, and in my weakness, I sought something, anything, that could make me feel alive again." Her confession, though laden with self-reproach, only deepened the chasm between us. The more we spoke, the more it became apparent that our paths were diverging, each step pulling us further away from the life we had once envisioned together. The atmosphere grew charged with a palpable tension. Our words, once filled with the promise of love, now carried the bitter flavor of resignation and betrayal. It was in that crucible of raw emotion that I realized there was no salvaging the remnants of what we had shared. The relationship we had nurtured had decayed beyond repair, and each attempt at communication only served to underline the profound differences that had emerged in our hearts. As the night wore on, the finality of our encounter became undeniable. There was no turning back, no possibility of rekindling the flame that had once burned so brightly between us. In that moment, with tears mingling with unspoken words, we acknowledged the bitter truth: our love had become a battleground, and the scars inflicted by betrayal were too deep to ever be healed. Leaving the bistro felt like walking away from a part of myself, a part that had once believed in the enduring power of love. The cool night air was a sobering reminder of the distance that had grown between us, both physically and emotionally. Every step I took was a step toward severing the last ties of a union that had long since lost its meaning. I knew that this conversation was not an attempt at reconciliation, it was the beginning of an inevitable separation, a necessary step to reclaiming the parts of myself that had been lost in the mire of our failed relationship. In the weeks that followed, I began to dismantle the life we had built together. Every shared possession, every familiar corner of our home, became a relic of a past that I was ready to leave behind. The process was both cathartic and excruciating, a slow shedding of memories that had once defined our love. I packed away photographs, mementos, and even the little trinkets that had filled our home with laughter, each item a reminder of a time when we were whole. Yet, even as I cleared the physical space, the emotional space that Sophia once occupied remained an ever-present void. I was left with a haunting silence, punctuated by the echoes of our last conversation, a conversation that had stripped away any remnants of hope for reconciliation. The realization that the love we once shared had morphed into something toxic was a bitter pill to swallow. There was no solace in the idea of second chances, no promise of renewal that could mend the deep fissures in our hearts. As I stood amidst the quiet ruins of our former life, I felt the unmistakable chill of finality. The once vibrant dreams that had fueled our shared future now lay in tatters, their remnants scattered like ashes in the wind. The confrontation with Sophia had not provided the closure I had sought. Instead, it had laid bare the painful truth that some wounds are too deep to ever truly heal. With each passing day, the hope for reconciliation dimmed further, replaced by the stark acceptance that our journey together had reached its end. The hostile separation was not marked by a dramatic explosion of emotions but by a slow, inevitable drift, a parting of ways that was as sorrowful as it was necessary. In that finality, I discovered a strange sense of liberation, a realization that sometimes, the only way to move forward is to let go of what once was, even if it means embracing the pain of an irrevocable goodbye. The finality of our separation echoed in every quiet moment, a constant reminder that the time had come to sever the last fragile ties of our shared past. The days following that fateful encounter in the bistro had morphed into a slow descent into an undeniable reality, a reality where the remnants of what we once had were reduced to scattered fragments of pain and memories. I knew that to reclaim my life, I had to let go of the ghost of Sophia, no matter how deeply she had once penetrated the fabric of my being. In the weeks after our final confrontation, the air between us grew thick with unspoken resentment and the weight of betrayal. Our parting was not marked by a dramatic farewell, but rather by a series of cold, deliberate actions. I found myself meticulously clearing out the physical space that we had both once called home, a process that was as symbolic as it was painful. Every item I packed away was a tangible piece of a past that had been irrevocably tainted by her infidelity. The photographs on the walls, the mementos from vacations, even the little knickknacks that had once sparked joy now seemed to whisper secrets of a love that had decayed. One crisp autumn morning, I returned to the apartment one last time. The sun was barely rising, casting long shadows across the room, and the chill in the air matched the cold emptiness in my heart. With a heavy heart, I unlocked the door, each creak of the hinges a stark reminder of the life that was slipping away. I moved methodically through each room, packing up belongings that had once symbolized our shared dreams. There was a perverse satisfaction in this act of finality, a way to reclaim control over a space that had become a mausoleum of memories. As I sorted through our belongings, I couldn't help but feel a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger, sorrow, and a reluctant sense of relief swirled within me. I paused at the shelf where we had kept our collection of books, each title a testament to the intellectual and emotional journey we had embarked upon together. Now, the shelf was a battleground for the war of my feelings, a silent witness to a love that had been betrayed and a future that had been forcibly rewritten. I carefully wrapped each item, as if distancing myself from the chaos of the past, and placed them into boxes destined for storage far away from the place of our broken dreams. Later that day, as I loaded the boxes into my car, I took one last look at the apartment that had once been our sanctuary. The weight of regret and loss pressed upon me, yet a sliver of hope began to emerge from the darkness. The hope was not for reconciliation, there was no room left for that, but for a future defined by self-reclamation and the possibility of healing. As I drove away, the cityscape blurred into a canvas of memories fading into the distance, each mile marking a step away from the person I had been and a tentative stride toward the man I hoped to become. That evening, I sat alone in a modest hotel room, the silence punctuated only by the distant hum of the city. I opened my journal, a trusted companion through the tumult, and began to write what might be the final entry of this painful chapter. My words were raw, unfiltered expressions of the anger and sorrow that had accompanied me through these trying days. I recounted the betrayal in all its painful detail, not as an act of rehashing old wounds, but as a cathartic exercise in facing the truth. With each sentence, I felt the chains of resentment begin to loosen, replaced gradually by a determination to move forward without the heavy baggage of our shattered past. As night deepened, I found solace in the solitude of that quiet room. The silence allowed my thoughts to settle, and amid the chaos of emotions, I began to see that this ending was not solely a tragedy, but also the beginning of a long journey toward liberation. The man who had once been defined by love and betrayal was now poised on the threshold of reinvention, a reinvention that demanded not only the shedding of old pain but also the acceptance of the scars as parts of a hard-won wisdom. Days turned into weeks, and the process of healing unfolded with both painful setbacks and small, hopeful victories. I began to rediscover old passions that had been buried under the weight of our crumbled union. I returned to the canvas, picking up a paintbrush after months of neglect, and let colors flow freely in an attempt to express emotions too deep for words. The act of creation became a silent rebellion against the despair that had once threatened to engulf me. With every stroke, I felt the residue of our toxic past dissolve, replaced by a slowly emerging sense of self. Meanwhile, Sophia and I maintained an austere correspondence, brief messages exchanged through lawyers and mutual friends, each word a reminder of the finality of our decision. There was no bitterness in these exchanges, only the clear, cold facts of a union that had been legally dissolved. Our communication was efficient, devoid of the emotional undertones that had once characterized our every conversation. It was as if we had agreed, silently, that our lives would now proceed on entirely separate paths, forever distinct and irreversibly severed. The final legal documents were signed with a mechanical detachment. In the sterile room of a lawyer's office, with neither of us looking at the other, we completed the process of our separation. There was no dramatic pronouncement, no tearful goodbye, just a shared understanding that our paths had diverged irrevocably. I felt a hollow victory in that moment, a liberation born of absolute clarity. The hostile separation was complete, and with it, the chapter of betrayal and shattered illusions had been closed forever. As I drove away from the courthouse, the chill of the winter air mingled with a cautious warmth in my chest, a tentative acknowledgement that, despite the scars, I was free to rebuild. The journey ahead was uncertain and laced with the remnants of past wounds, but it was a journey I was now ready to undertake alone. I embraced the solitude not as a curse, but as an opportunity for introspection and renewal. In the quiet spaces between heartbeats, I vowed to learn from the painful lessons of our shared past, forging a future defined by my own strength and resilience. Standing at the crossroads of memory and newfound purpose, I recognized that this ending was both bitter and necessary, a violent severing of a bond that had done nothing but leave behind scars. The hostility that had once clouded every interaction was now replaced by a clear, unyielding resolve, to live authentically, free from the shadows of betrayal, and to build a future that, while born of sorrow, promised the possibility of redemption and renewal. In that final, stark moment of liberation, I closed the door on a love that had betrayed its own promises. With the echoes of the past fading into silence, I stepped forward into an unknown future, a future where I was determined to find peace and rebuild my identity from the fragments of a life that had been shattered, yet not completely destroyed.